strange how easily society laughs off the damage caused by drinking, almost as if the numbers are just statistics instead of lives. When you pause long enough to really absorb what's happening around the world, it becomes clear that millions of people are quietly drowning in a problem most of us pretend not to see. Across the globe, hundreds of millions are struggling with alcohol-related issues, and an enormous portion of them are physically dependent, trapped in a cycle they never intended to build. It's staggering to think how many individuals are slowly losing themselves to something that's sold casually at every gathering, celebration, or sad night alone. And every year, millions don't survive the consequences of that struggle. Imagine an entire major city vanishing annually because of one substance, and somehow the world barely flinches. If something else wiped out that many people in a year, there would be worldwide alarm, emergency plans, endless debates, and international action. But because it's alcohol, the world shrugs. It's almost treated like an unfortunate side note rather than a crisis. What makes this even more complicated is how misunderstood the experience of living with alcohol dependence really is. People who haven't dealt with it often see it as a series of choices. Choosing to drink too much, choosing to be irresponsible, choosing to avoid problems. But the reality inside the mind of someone caught in addiction is far more tangled than that. The intention behind describing it isn't to earn pity or soften anyone's judgment. It's not about excuses. It's about clarity, because without understanding the psychological reality, the behavior looks absurd, selfish, and senseless from the outside. And ironically, those descriptions often match how many dependent drinkers see themselves. The condition warps the mind until self-respect erodes and shame becomes a constant companion. The strange part is that many people assume drinking heavily is the easy road, the simple alternative to dealing with life's challenges. For some, it begins exactly that way. A drink becomes a shield against stress, discomfort, fear, loneliness, restlessness, or memories that sting too deeply. It gives temporary relief, an emotional dimmer switch that softens the edges of the world. But calling it easy ignores the torment that comes afterward. Alcohol dependence isn't a soft escape. It's exhausting. It's physically punishing. It consumes every corner of a person's day. It feels like running a marathon you didn't train for, every single day, except the finish line never appears. There's a kind of cellular level fatigue that settles in, a heaviness that never lifts. The body grows tired from constant dehydration, the nervous system stays in a perpetual state of alarm, and the brain swings wildly between panic and haze. People romanticize drunkenness, imagining laughter, relaxation, and confidence. But for those who depend on alcohol, the reality carries none of that shine. Most of the time, there isn't even enjoyment involved anymore. The drink becomes a compulsory act, something done out of necessity rather than pleasure. When the alcohol level dips too low, the body revolts, the hands tremble, the heart spikes, anxiety spikes into terror. There's a sense that something terrible is moments away. And the only quick fix available is more alcohol. It's a nightmare loop that makes every hour a negotiation with discomfort. Even people who aren't at the extreme end of dependence can experience a miniature version of that daily obsession. Waking up with a racing pulse, sweating before breakfast, feeling that creeping dread that only a drink seems to calm. The calculation begins immediately upon opening the eyes. Should they drink a little just to steady themselves? Will anyone notice? How long until they're allowed another? Should they buy extra later so they don't run out? The mind becomes completely occupied with managing alcohol intake long before most people have even had their morning coffee. Even moderate problem drinkers spend incredible amounts of mental energy planning around their next drink, worrying about running out, wondering if today is the day they'll cut back or the day they'll lose control again. The internal negotiations are endless. Promises are made and broken before midday. Someone may swear they'll keep it light today, maybe just a few drinks, maybe only beer instead of spirits. And then by evening, they're rationalizing why they deserve more. It becomes a cycle of bargaining with oneself, a constant back and forth between intention and impulse. And every broken promise chips away a little more at their self-worth. That's one of the cruelest truths about alcohol dependence. The shame isn't a side effect. It becomes woven into the identity. People tell small lies about how much they've had, often without even realizing they're doing it. They say they had less than they did. They hide bottles, hide receipts, hide the truth even when it's obvious. It's automatic. It doesn't feel like deception in the moment. It feels like survival. The lying isn't limited to others. It extends inward. The mind invents justifications so quickly that they feel like truth. Someone may claim they only drink because work is stressful, or because they're lonely, or because it helps them sleep, or because everyone else drinks, or because they're not as bad as someone they know. Anything to avoid confronting the reality that the substance has taken over their decision-making. Soon the person is living two parallel lives. The outside one that appears functional, controlled, and reasonable, and the inside one that is unraveling thread by thread. Keeping track of which story was told to whom becomes its own burden, and the stress of maintaining the facade only fuels the urge to drink more. The physical toll is equally brutal. Sleep becomes a parody of rest. People who depend on alcohol often pass out for long stretches, but there is no restoration in that unconsciousness. They wake up as tired as they were when they collapsed, sometimes more so. Their heart may hammer unexpectedly. Their hands may shake as if from cold. Their stomach feels raw. Their head pulses. The body feels poisoned because it is. But instead of listening to those signals, a drink becomes the shortcut to temporary relief. It deadens the symptoms just long enough to create the illusion of normalcy. Then the cycle repeats. What makes the situation even more confusing is how inconsistent the emotions can be. Someone struggling may swing rapidly between arrogance and despair. In one moment, they feel unstoppable, charming, superior. And in the next, they feel worthless, ashamed, resentful, and weak. Alcohol distorts the emotional compass dramatically. It makes a person self-centered without meaning to be, not out of cruelty, but because the mind shrinks down to a single focus: survival through alcohol. Everything else becomes background noise. Other people's feelings, needs, and concerns become harder to register because the brain is too busy trying to keep the body steady. What many don't realize is that most dependent drinkers don't even want to keep drinking. The misconception is that they enjoy it too much to stop. But that's almost never the case after a certain point. At the beginning, maybe it felt like fun, but eventually the pleasure evaporates. All that remains is compulsion. Many people despise the role alcohol has taken in their life. They resent how small their world has become. They hate that they hurt people. They hate that they hide things. They hate that they can't trust their own promises. And yet, when the fear and physical symptoms collide, they reach for the bottle anyway, because the alternative feels unbearable. It often feels like being trapped in quicksand. Every attempt to pull free only drags you deeper. The drink is both the comfort and the threat. It calms the storm for a few minutes, but the cost is always waiting. And once the mind becomes entangled with the substance, alcohol begins speaking in the person's own voice. It whispers convincing logic. It suggests control where there is none. It encourages one more drink by promising it won't spiral this time. Those thoughts feel real, even though they're born from the substance itself. It's a haunting experience, feeling like the mind is split in two, with one part begging for escape and the other part steering toward destruction. There comes a stage in a drinker's decline where every illusion falls apart and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The drink that once felt like comfort turns into something closer to a cage. It doesn't soothe anymore, not really. Even when someone swallows enough to quiet the trembling or silence the panic, the relief lasts only moments. Once that small window closes, the heaviness returns, thicker than before. The body feels poisoned and the mind feels hollow. The fog never fully lifts. The hunger for another drink is no longer about pleasure, but about avoiding the unbearable state that arrives when the alcohol fades. It becomes a cycle of chasing fragments of relief, each fragment smaller than the last. Even the messy physical side becomes something they grow used to. Passing out instead of sleeping, waking drenched in sweat, feeling the stomach twist, feeling the pulse sprint with no warning. Staring at the ceiling through the dark hours of the morning, unable to relax without pouring more into the bloodstream. Some wake with their heart pounding so fast, they're convinced they're moments from collapse. Some wake shaking so violently, they spill the glass they're holding. Some can't eat for days. That's the part no one sees when they casually say someone drinks too much. They don't see how the body wages war against itself. They don't see the panic behind the eyes. Yet the strangest part is how normal it can all feel once the mind adapts. Dependency reshapes the brain until chaos becomes routine. It trains the person to survive inside a world that is slowly collapsing around them. Something as horrifying as hiding bottles in random places becomes ordinary. The secrecy becomes instinct. They move through life with secret stashes tucked behind furniture, under car seats, in bags, behind bookshelves, or tossed into bins blocks away from home. They lie because they're terrified of losing access to the only thing that keeps the withdrawal away. They lie because telling the truth would mean facing the state they're really in. They lie because shame convinces them that honesty would shatter everything. And the deeper they sink, the easier lying becomes, until it feels automatic. This isn't about a lack of morality. It's about desperation. When the brain links alcohol to survival, truth becomes secondary. They believe that if they stop drinking, everything inside them will crash. And many times, that feeling isn't wrong. Severely dependent drinkers really can face dangerous withdrawals without medical care. But even for those who aren't physically collapsing, the fear itself becomes powerful enough to rule their thoughts. The possibility of feeling raw reality, unfiltered, unsoftened, unshielded, feels like a threat. Drinking becomes the only familiar place, even when the familiar place is destroying them. What many people misunderstand is that the drink doesn't just numb pain, it numbs everything. It shuts down the sorrow, yes, but it shuts down the joy too. The highs shrink. The moments that should feel meaningful lose their color. Someone deep in alcohol dependence often describes life as flat, muted, or distant. It's like watching their own existence through a window. They see people laughing or connecting or building something meaningful, but they feel separated, as if there's a glass wall between them and the world. Alcohol promises freedom but delivers isolation. It promises escape but traps its user in a narrowing circle where every day looks like the one before. Underneath it all is a quiet self-disgust, not always visible, not always spoken, but persistent. Someone might project confidence, while inside they feel like they're falling apart. They may act irritable, arrogant, impatient, or withdrawn, not because they don't care about the people around them, but because the emotional wiring becomes tangled. The mind loses the ability to read subtle signals from others. Their world shrinks to a tiny point of focus, where everything revolves around managing the next drink or recovering from the last one. The guilt sits beneath every decision, every thought, every morning after promise. And yet the guilt itself becomes another reason to reach for more. The emotional contradictions are brutal. They want connection, but push people away. They crave kindness, but snap at anyone who tries to help. They hate being alone, yet isolate themselves completely. They resent their dependence, but cling to it because they can't imagine functioning without it. They feel undeserving of love, but desperately want it. They oscillate between believing they're invincible and believing they're beyond hope. The pendulum never stops swinging. It's mentally exhausting, emotionally draining, spiritually hollowing. Then comes the dangerous illusion that they can control it. Even after years of chaos, a part of the mind whispers that maybe this time will be different. Maybe one drink won't turn into many. Maybe they can drink like normal people now. Maybe they've changed, or grown, or learned enough to manage it. But alcohol dependence doesn't negotiate. It doesn't bargain. One moment of permission can send everything crashing back into the same spiral, sometimes even faster than before. And people who depend on alcohol don't just experience relapses as mistakes. They experience them as personal failures so deep that it reinforces every shred of shame they already carry. What's even more heartbreaking is how often they genuinely believe they're only hurting themselves. They don't see the worry in the faces of those who love them. They don't fully grasp the weight their condition puts on others. They aren't indifferent. They're numbed. Their awareness shrinks until the suffering of others can't fully register. The world outside feels distant, blurry, or sometimes threatening. Their own emotions take up so much psychological space that they don't have room left to consider anyone else's. It's not cruelty. It's collapse. And inside this collapse, a strange form of delusion grows. Some become convinced they are charming or irresistible, even when they're physically and mentally falling apart. Alcohol inflates the ego at the same time it erodes dignity. Someone can be lying on a hospital bed, covered in the aftermath of their own collapse, and still believe they're captivating. It sounds absurd, even humorous, but it reveals how powerful the distortion becomes. The substance rewires self-perception until confidence and deterioration coexist in the same breath. To live this way is to feel trapped in a loop of compulsions that don't make sense even to the person experiencing them. Imagine wanting nothing more than to quit, but still picking up the bottle with shaking hands. Imagine begging yourself to stop even as you pour another drink. Imagine vomiting from the poison but still finishing the glass. That is the reality many face. Not pleasure, not fun, not rebellion, but compulsion stronger than logic, stronger than will, stronger than shame. And yet, for many, alcohol becomes the closest thing they have to comfort. not because it truly comforts them, but because everything else feels sharper, colder, too real. Drinking becomes the only way they know how to soften life's edges. They use it as a shield against memories, emotions, thoughts, or realities that feel unbearable. They treat alcohol like a remedy, even though their body reacts to it like a toxin. That's the tragic irony. The thing they depend on is also the thing that is destroying them. Escaping that world isn't simple. It requires unlearning habits that have become fused into every part of daily life. It requires facing the person they've avoided meeting, themselves, without alcohol's filter. It requires courage that doesn't always feel available, and patience they don't think they possess. And it requires admitting that the drink is not a friend, not a shield, not a medicine, but a trap disguised as relief. The journey out doesn't start with sudden strength. It begins with a small moment of clarity, a whisper that maybe life could be different than this. Maybe the fog isn't permanent. Maybe the body can heal. Maybe the mind can relearn how to function without the liquid crutch. Maybe they deserve better than the wooden taste of regret every morning. Those early sparks of hope feel fragile, but they are real. And eventually, if nurtured, they grow into the kind of determination that breaks through the hold alcohol once had. Until that moment arrives, many keep stumbling through the same maze, hoping for a different turn, wishing for a way out, trying to find meaning inside the wreckage. And while the world may judge them harshly, dismiss them, fear them, or misunderstand them, the truth is that inside every person trapped in dependence is someone trying, often desperately, to find a version of themselves they haven't met in years.